Our panelists this morning is to paint the big picture of how economic security is being reshaped or needs to be reshaped in this broad region from Southwest Asia to the Middle East. As chairman, I would be particularly grateful for our panelists to share their national experiences and lessons related to economic security and extrapolate this experience to the broader region. In the end, we can measure success of this plenary session by how well all of you, the audience, feel that you have an enriched sense of how economic security is being or should be reshaped in Southwest Asia and the Middle East. You all have in your registration packages the bios of our speakers, so I won't spend time telling you details of their impressive careers. My job is to facilitate the discussion and interaction between our panelists and you, the audience. May I begin with brief remarks from His Excellency Yawid Ludin, the Afghan Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finlay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here this morning, and I really thank the EastWest Institute, the World Customs Organization, and the Financial Times, who I believe is also a collaborator of this important forum. You only need to pay a brief glance to the agenda of this conference to get a sense of how important and timely the discussion we are having today is, and it's such a pleasure for me to be part of this today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a cliche nowadays to say that the 21st century will be shaped by Asia. Like the 20th century was shaped by the United States, and the previous 2 centuries before that by Europe. Asia is, in fact, poised to influence the 21st century in a way that no other continent will. And Asia has all the right ingredients to play that role. It has a cultural and historic underpinning. It has the economic and demographic clout to do that, and it has the geostrategic elements. Asia has been a cradle of great civilizations, and that gives the continent, the people, the confidence that you need in order to influence the world in a decisive manner. We have the continent as a whole has more than 50% of the world's population, and it has boundless resources and wealth, as well as I said, we're increasingly seeing that the vision also is increasingly there. However, one lesson that we have learned is that the single most important hindrance to success, to being able to achieve growth and glory, is conflict. So the biggest challenge in Asia today is that despite all the great imperatives that it has to unite, it remains fragmented along political and security lines. And the single biggest challenge of Asia in the 21st century won't be really the want of resources, but the vision to unite and remove those fragmentations. This is where the importance of my country, Afghanistan, really comes into focus. As an ancient nation in the heart of Asia, we have always prided ourselves for being a land bridge that connects different parts of the continent. However, for decades now, the conflict in Afghanistan has actually hindered Asia's integration and the realization of the collective potentials of all of us to grow and prosper. It's very interesting to see how, and just an illustration of the point that I just made, railways are re-emerging now as a central mode of connection, transportation, and integration. Afghanistan is right at the center of three great sub-regions of Asia, and we actually disconnect or divide the three regions from coming together and be connected by railways. There is a whole railway network that comes right to our west, southern and eastern border, and then that spreads out right to Thailand, but it stops on our borders. And then there's another railway connection with Soviet gauge that comes right to our northern border, and thankfully it has just made a very short inroads inside coming to Mazar-e-Sharif, but it actually stops, most of it stops on our border, and then up going north it goes all the way to Siberia and all the way to Europe. And then there is a European gauge that comes all the way to our western border from Iran, and that's where it stops. So this is just to illustrate how, because we were unable to provide the stability to facilitate integration, it has worked the opposite way. Rather than a land bridge, we have been a disconnect in the region. And this is really because, as one of the worst and longest-running conflicts in Asia, Afghanistan has endured invasion, interference, the breakup of state institutions, and above all, terrorism in its worst possible form. And it's not really us as a nation that have lost precious time and opportunity. The opportunity cost for the region has been really significant. But what I would like to really say today and focus more is the good story, the positive change that I'm seeing. I'm pleased to say that that in the last 10 years, as we in Afghanistan have taken the opportunity that was presented to us to make a transition from conflict and war and to peace, stable, peaceful, and self-reliant country, we are also seeing increasingly the signs that the region that surrounds us is equally going through a transformation in the positive direction. Let me tell you a little bit briefly about the transition that we are going through. Afghanistan today is going through what I call multiple transitions. The one transition that you here in Europe know most about is the security transition, involving the gradual withdrawal of the NATO and International Security Assistance Force from Afghanistan by 2014, and the transfer of responsibility for the security of Afghanistan to Afghanistan's own forces. This is one of the most concrete, most important aspects of the transition in Afghanistan. We're currently really focusing in a significant way on building up our own institutions, security institutions, to make sure that that transition is sustainable and that Afghanistan is able not just to defend itself, but also play a role in terms of our collective fight against terrorism. Because one thing is clear, that come 2014, Afghanistan will hopefully achieve stability, but terrorism as a threat will not go away. Terrorism as a threat has regrettably sanctuaries, roots, and bases outside Afghanistan in our region that will remain, and that's an enormous source of concern and danger, not just for Afghanistan, but for the whole region in the rest of the world. One other important measure that we are taking in order to achieve stability for Afghanistan is by announcing what we call the peace process. This means that the Afghan elements that have, or the Afghan parts of the Taliban and other armed opposition groups who have fought in the last decade or so against the Afghan government and Afghan people, we need to wean them away from the centers of extremism in the region and see if we can integrate them in Afghanistan's political life. That effort is currently one of our most important strategic priorities, and we're working with Pakistan, we're working with other regional countries and in the region and beyond to see to achieve success. The second transition in Afghanistan is political transition. On that front, Afghanistan really in the last 10 years taken steps. These have been slow steps, these have been difficult steps, but these have nonetheless been steady steps that we have taken to take the young democracy in Afghanistan towards gradual maturation in strength. We will, Independent Election Commission just announced very recently that the third presidential elections in Afghanistan in this post-Taliban period will take place on the 5th of April in 2014. Now, we're working and we're confident that we will be able to, even though challenges remain there, we will be able to pull this major undertaking off, and we will be able to deliver on this. And this will really take Afghanistan an enormous step forward in this political transition. And one of the objectives of the peace process, which I explained earlier, is also to see if we can get the armed opposition to transform from a military entity into a political entity that could participate in these elections, and really that will be a major steps towards deepening stability. I mean, but the major source of confidence for us in the political transition is the fact that over the last 10 years, it's not just visible and physical aspects of progress and achievements we've seen. We've also seen a transformation in the Afghan society, the youth in Afghanistan, the revolution in education we have seen, the revolution in civil society we have seen, media, which is a very important anchor of the civil society, has seen such a transformation that makes it simply impossible to imagine that this transition will be anything but a steady progress towards democratization. Nowadays, people, in fact, in this very city, there are think tanks like the one that's yours, the EastWest Institute, that focuses on opportunities, that focuses on the stories that usually escape the attention of the media. But there are others who read too much into reporting from the battlefield, which admittedly remains difficult. But inadvertently they paint negative pictures of the future of Afghanistan, that the country will go through civil war, the country will go back to the Taliban. I tell you, it will not. And the most important guarantor of that is not, as I said, the visible aspects of the achievements of the past 10 years, but the things that you in the outside world don't get to see. And that is the historic transformation that has happened in the society in Afghanistan. The youth, the women, and men. Thirdly, economic transition. I'll very briefly touch this. There has been a fear that the withdrawal of foreign military forces, that has really been the single biggest source of the financial inflows and a source of the growth of the Afghan economy in the last 10 years, will have a major impact on the economy of Afghanistan. We have already seen signs as the withdrawal of NATO takes place. There are effects on the society. We see greater unemployment. We have seen some effects, but we are also trying to replace that, and that's where the region comes in. We have seen in the last number of years, we have seen major examples of investment in Afghanistan, investment in mining and investment in natural resources. So that takes me to the fourth and perhaps more relevant transformation or transition in Afghanistan. That is the regional transition in Afghanistan. I said earlier that Afghanistan has, or the conflict in Afghanistan has had a major opportunity cost for the region. Indeed, the situation in Afghanistan has been a responsibility for the region. It's been mainly, a region has for a long time been the source of invasion, interference, instability, and violence for the Afghan people. It is now time for that to change. It's time for the region to invest in our success rather than bet on our misfortunes. And that's what we've seen. I think that's what we have seen. As I said, that's why I started by saying that I'm optimistic about the future when it comes to the regional dimension, because at the regional level we're seeing the countries that are beginning to invest in Afghanistan's success. We have seen China, India investing billions of dollars in development of Afghanistan's mineral resources. That is what I call investing in our success. We've also seen Turkey, Russia, Kazakhstan, other major countries in the region, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and others investing in a significant way in Afghanistan's success, as well as Pakistan and Iran. Lastly, I would just say that we, as I'll conclude by this, that we started last year a process called the Istanbul process, a number of us. The lessons we learned, and the single most important lesson is that if you talk about economic cooperation, and if you focus on economic aspects of cooperation without really thinking about the dynamics of the political and security divisions that affect this region, economic cooperation will just remain a slogan in rhetoric. That is what happened in the last 10 years ago. We really worked hard to generate cooperation in terms of regional infrastructure, in terms of trade, transit, but really we've only achieved limited result. In the Istanbul process, we realized that we must really go deeper, a level deeper. We must build confidence, and we must address some of the arcane, established assumptions and conceptions that exist before we can move on and achieve regional integration. And I'm, in the last 1 year already, I'm extremely grateful to say that we have achieved good results. The Istanbul process now is the most important regional forum that puts Afghanistan at the center, but it focuses on the question of encouraging cooperation in a way that will benefit the entire region. And I'm just going to commit to our regional partners here from this podium that Afghanistan takes its connection with the region extremely seriously. We will build relationship with countries outside the region. We've benefited from contributions from countries from East and West and North and South, and that is something we value and we will invest in. But we know that our future lies in the region, and that will be the most important pillar of our foreign policy in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Ludin. A realistic overview, a reassuringly optimistic outlook, an account of the particular challenges and your local advantages and resources. Thank you very much indeed. So now we turn to Ambassador Saad. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. At the outset, allow me to thank the EastWest Institute for convening this important event and for inviting me to contribute in one of its sessions. This type of exchange between policymakers, professionals, and academics has definitely seen a rise in dominance in the last years, especially the last decade. We now see more open debate with regards to new ideas and concepts, and many a time these gatherings have been instrumental in synthesizing and testing new policy trends. It is therefore that I give my intervention hoping to incite a fruitful exchange of views and be thought-provoking. Actually, my intervention focuses on connotation. The title of the conference, Reshaping Economic Security in Southwest Asia and the Middle East, gave us, where I have three terms to address. One is reshaping, two is economic security, three is Southwest Asia and the Middle East. First, reshaping. In other words, the rationale of the action expected as an outcome of the conference, which suggests at the same time that there is already in place a model for economic security that we want to reshape. What automatically pops up is the question, what is the model and why we want to reshape it? Two, Southwest Asia and the Middle East. In other words, the geographical aspect. Let me start by saying that this is not a very common perspective. Even traditionally in international relations, this is not the main unit of analysis for assessing the region's potential for peace, prosperity, or conflict. It is not reflected by regional organization, nor is it presented by regional groupings. And there is a reason for this, and this is the point that I would like to stress in my presentation here today. One can find very little in common between Kabul or Istanbul and Djibouti, except maybe from the perspective of a generalizing religious identity approach, or a superstructure imposed geostrategically that shifts focus to the east and puts countries like Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan all in some form of crisis in the heart of it. One can argue that the Mediterranean, Europe to the north, African to the south, have much more in common, and there is significant relation between them. This, however, by no means discredits the fact that this region or amalgamation of regions, like practically all others in this world, is facing the challenges of security in all its forms, with economic security featuring very high on that list. 3. This actually brings me to the third term, economic security, since it's really not one that conjures consensus in any way. But leaving aside all the major question marks that it raised, with regard to whose security we are talking about. Is it state or society or individual? Or what happens when security is breached? Or where the onus of action to prevent or rectify this situation would eventually lie? All of which legitimate questions that are raised by that term, however, are out of the scope of our meeting today. Despite the lack of consensus on these vital points in defining economic security, I still believe we can agree that in today's world, the bigger guns don't provide with more security. And since we are talking about the space of the world that occupies North Africa and Southwest Asia, I think we need to look any further, for example, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. The point I'm trying to make is that we live in a truly globalized world, and that more than any other time in history, this globalization is economic, depending on free flow of goods, services, raw materials, globalized competition that reaches or strongly affects life in the farthest corners of the globe. This is aided by phenomenal leaps in communication technology that end up changing societies. However, as the opportunities and the dynamics are globalized, so are the main challenges, which through to the nature of an economic globalization are also increasingly economic, globalized in ever-increasing flow of people, whether legal or immigration, or whether permanent or temporary in temporary form, from a countries where there is no hope to the countries where they are traditionally invited. Today, we hear a lot about an energy, food, water nexus. I believe looking at these terms that such nexus has always existed, and that there is importance as drivers for prosperity or reasons for conflict has always been there and acknowledged. People needed energy, water, and food security since the beginning of civilization, and have been fighting each other to secure them for the same length of time. It's the increased spillover effect and incredible interconnectedness that marks our life today that makes all the difference. In 2012, the World Economic Forum, in its report on global risks, identified 5 major centers of conflict gravity that should be the focal point guiding strategy planning and interventions on the part of states. These are chronic fiscal imbalances, greenhouse gas emissions, global governance failure, unsustainable population growth, critical systems failure. While listing major financial failure, water supply crisis and food shortages crisis as the same 3 major risks in terms of their impact on population and security. A brief glance at this list will tell us that most of these challenges are actually global in nature, even if they manifest more acutely in a region or another. A slightly deeper look will confirm that where problem is worse, the spillover effect to neighboring regions will be almost immediate, and that where that spillover effect will take place will differ according to the issue. Let us take food security as an example. We have just experienced 2 major food crises in 2007, 2008, and 2010, 2011. Without going into details regarding the dynamics and the reasons behind the hikes in staple foods that we have witnessed, and whether or not they have been due to bad planning or market manipulation or the expansion in biofuel production. I think we can safely say that countries where food purchases amount for the greatest part of their income, like many developing countries, have been hit hardest as a result of these consecutive crises. In sub-Saharan Africa, where more than 72% of the youth population lives on less than $2 a day, such unexpected hikes can be detrimental to stability and security, both within countries, regionally, and cross-regionally. In this context, debates about whether climate change constitutes a threat to food security become as central to the discussion for security as those debates about land productivity, efficiency of production, access and mobility, and many other factors. Not far off from the same debate is the effect of the food climate population growth would have on immigration, cross-regional security between Africa and the Middle East and Europe, which I believe still the remains of the region with most intersection with the Middle East on issues pertaining to security, especially economic security. By 2100, Africa is projected to hold 3/4 of the population of Asia and 3 of the 10 most populous countries in the world, with the highest fertility rate, the youngest and the most rapidly urbanizing population on the planet. The continent represents a major human investment opportunity, coupled with 733 million hectares of arable land. It has the potential of feeding itself and its neighbors. However, with an average of 30 to 40% of population suffering from undernourishment and about 40% of the world's hot conflicts, some of which a direct repercussion of climate change and water scarcity, as well as being the source of most of the world's internally displaced people and refugees. Africa faces a lot of challenges that could potentially affect the Middle East and mainly Europe. The North-South axis is one that cannot be discounted or overlooked. This axis cannot be ignored even if we consider the highest risk of global economic security I mentioned earlier, major financial failure. With the euro crisis and the ramification of slowing economic growth in Europe, the decrease in cash and the investment flows, and what seems to be a steady rise of anti-immigrant sentiment, cross-regional security threat are emphasized once more. The point I hope I have been successful in illustrating is that the economic challenges facing this part of the world are only manifestation of global problems that in turn need global solutions. Pursuing the path of cooperation with any country is, of course, a political choice, as President Ihtisari said. And it is definitely the more desirable choice given the alternatives of potential conflict and deprivation. However, I believe that such cooperation would not stand a chance without the involvement of other partners with whom synergies and commonalities already exist, and whose contribution would be of distinct added value to any such endeavor. Thank you very much.
Youssef.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me start by thanking the EastWest Institute and the World Customs Organization for holding this meeting. Your program in the introduction for this session includes a number of questions that I thought are extremely pertinent. And this is why I will try in my intervention to present you with an Arab perspective on how we view this issue and its implication. The first question that was asked was about regional economic cooperation and whether regional economic cooperation can be a key to security in the region. And the answer is absolutely yes. But the situation is somewhat more complicated. And this is why we have to link that with the question on the current state of cooperation and its impact on economic security. I think that if you ask reasonable people in Greece, they will tell you that they would have been in much deeper trouble hadn't it been for the help of the European Union. But on the other hand, many people in Europe will probably also tell you that they are paying for mistakes that were committed by others. But in the final analysis, many would argue that overcoming this crisis in Europe will strengthen Europe in the long run. And what doesn't break you will always make you stronger. In our part of the world, we have not reached this level of maturity. When Libya had a problem with Egypt, a political problem, Libya expelled Egyptian workers and they closed the borders for the flow of trade. This also happened when there were problems between Libya and Tunisia. Harmful as this may be, even to the interests of Libya itself. This is also sometimes the situation between Morocco and Algeria, Saudi Arabia and Qatar at one point in time, and in many other cases. So this is the kind of difficulty that we face. Of course, we have been working on a free trade agreement in the Arab world that has been partially successful. We're working on a customs union, and we have huge intra-Arab trade, investment, tourism, and movement of labor. We've even worked on an equivalent of a neighborhood policy to the Arab world. And this was presented to Arab governments to see how the Arab world can cooperate with the neighborhood surrounding the Arab world in Africa, Asia, and Southern Europe. But this was not accepted by member states. But in the final analysis, I believe that regional cooperation will be strengthened when it is between democracies. I will go even further and say that when stakes are high, differences between democracies are resolved peacefully. And unfortunately, in the Arab world, we have failed to prevent political problems from harming economic interests. But now we're passing through a totally new phase, a phase that is unprecedented in many ways. Now we have a number of Arab countries that are in transition and are moving towards democracy, like Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. Others are struggling to become even countries in transition, like Syria. But then there are still a number of countries that are trying to avoid this fate altogether. So in the near future, we will have huge differences in the degree of representativeness of governments in the region to the aspirations of their people. And it's not yet clear how this would unfold and what the implications of such developments would be. But at the same time, we also have to admit that changes in the Arab world, as a result of the Arab awakening, rising unemployment, especially amongst the young, social pressures, are forcing governments to act in a much more responsive and responsible way. So governments will succeed if they are able to move fast and match expectations of their people, or at least come close to fulfilling these aspirations. If not, then we may have further upheavals that may be quite violent, some resemblance of revolutions of the poor. The next question that was asked for this session is a very difficult one. It is about whether water, energy, and food security are drivers for cooperation or subject of tension. And our experience in the Arab world is quite complicated in relation to these issues. Because as you know, the Arab world has some of the richest oil-producing countries in the world. But at the same time, it has countries that import close to 100% of their hydrocarbon needs, like Jordan, for example. It also has countries that have adequate water resources, like the Sudan, like Egypt, that has been called the gift of the Nile. Of course, these are not without problems, but still they have adequate water resources. And we have countries that have huge shortages in water resources and have to rely heavily on desalination, particularly in the Gulf. So the Arab world has 0.7% of global water resources and 5% of the world's population. And this is why many experts have been predicting that the next war in the Middle East will be a war for water. Of course, I've seen many wars in the last decade or more, and they haven't been about water. But it is an indication of how serious water shortages may affect our region, particularly that 2/3 of the water of the Arab world come from outside our region, and they are governed by different and complicated legal instruments. Water also has an impact on issues pertaining to food security. And the vast majority of the Arab countries are net food importers that have to cope with rising food bills, and at the same time, we're suffering from a huge gap since our agricultural exports only cover 30% of our food imports. Grains, cooking oil, milk, and sugar, essential food products, constitute around 82% of our food gap. This only goes to show how fundamental the food gap is in our part of the world. And we have huge challenges in introducing modern production methods, modern irrigation systems, particularly that 90% of our water consumption is in the area of agriculture. We need to give priority to research and development and to increased productivity in the agricultural sector. So, are these areas drivers of cooperation, or are they a source of tension? I'll just give you one example about a deal that was made between Egypt and Jordan to export gas through a gas pipeline from Egypt to Jordan. So when this deal was reached, it was considered as a major transition in forms of cooperation in our part of the world. But then, this flow had to be stopped and became a source of tension. So one issue can be both at the same time. It can be considered as a source of additional cooperation, but also as a source of tension. And is regional cooperation in this context a realistic prospect? Absolutely. A few decades ago, regional cooperation was considered one of the options. Now it is no longer an option. It is a necessity. Even a country as big as the United States that was not convinced that regional cooperation was important joined NAFTA and is now working even on a hemispheric cooperation agreement in the areas of trade and beyond. We have our difficulties. We have similar production structures. We have numerous barriers to trade and movement of people. But we also have huge advantages. Suffice it to say that we are probably the only region in the world that can cooperate in one language. We're the only regional organization in the world that works in one official language. Of course, I don't need to tell people here in Brussels that Europe speaks 23 languages. So this is the kind of challenges that faces Europe. Finally, what is the role of outside powers, and how can they contribute in relation to regional cooperation? I think there are 5 points, and I'll mention them very briefly. The first point is for us to be treated as a region. It seems that there are many powers in the world that do not want to treat the Arab world as a region. Even the European Union divides us into 4 segments: the Mediterranean segment, the Gulf countries, the LDCs, along with other LDCs in the rest of the world, and 2 countries that do not belong in the Arab world, that do not belong to any of these groups, and these are Iraq and Yemen. So it is not the greater Middle East, it's not the wider Middle East, it's not the broader Middle East. At one point in time, and perhaps the Arab Spring should be an indication that the Arab world is a region after all. The second point is to facilitate market access for products coming from the Middle East and the Arab world in particular. The third point is to provide investment guarantees to encourage investors to come to our region, particularly in light of the fact that as a result of the Arab revolutions, foreign direct investment declined by around 38% in 2011. The fourth point is to encourage tourism to the region that lost over $13 billion last year also as a result of the revolutions. Finally, to assist, but at the same time to be humble, because we have to admit that we were all surprised by the change that took place in the Arab world. So it took the whole world by surprise. And I think that the Arab world will be facing all kinds of challenges and difficulties. We have fundamental questions to resolve, perhaps that have been resolved decades ago in Europe, but they are yet to be resolved in our part of the world, in relation to how we deal with church and state, how we address issues pertaining to reconciliation, transitional justice, modernization and maintaining our cultural heritage, social justice, what it means, how it can be achieved, and many more. Finally, we need to balance the need for prompt policy action with broad ownership of the vision, strategy, and the roadmap for the reform that will guide economic transition in our region. Timely and adequate international support is also essential to maintain economics and perhaps even political stability in our region in order to achieve growth and job creation for a young and dynamic population that has been admired in Arab revolutions by the whole world. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that overview of the challenges and extraordinary opportunities in the region. Now we turn to Ambassador Patricia Flor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a particular pleasure today to be here with you and to attend this very important and promising conference. Now, being the EU Special Representative for Central Asia, you will not be surprised to find that I will look at the issues raised here under the angle of Central Asia. So I will talk first about Central Asia in a regional perspective, then about what I would call the wider region, including Afghanistan, and third, also about the European Union policy as it stands now to promote security and economic security in Central Asia and the wider region. Now, Central Asia, of course, is already engaged now for about 20 years in reshaping. Reshaping meaning a basic transformation from the Soviet system to market economy, to a new political system, to rule of law, to recreating really many of the institutions which are necessary for a modern state in the 21st century. Now, the European Union has found that Central Asia is a region that is of increasing importance to us. And through the EU Central Asia strategy for a new partnership, which was adopted in 2007, then reviewed in 2012, we have committed to deepening the relations between the EU and the region and to reinforce this transformation. Within the EU Central Asia strategy, the idea of regional cooperation has been one priority. Of course, because our own experience as EU is that that is the best way actually to promote prosperity, but also human rights and rule of law. Now, I do not want to hide here that has not been an easy sell in the region. Starting from the fact that not everyone actually feels that Central Asia, as it is clustered now, so the 5 post-Soviet states in that region, is actually one region. So we have a little bit the same that what we've heard right now about the Arab world. Secondly, there continues to be, until today, also certain reservations, and there is also mistrust among neighbors in the Central Asia region. Both is deeply rooted, and so therefore, as of today, very few institutional frameworks for regional cooperation do actually exist. Now, that of course is also one of the consequences of conflicts which actually have taken place in the region after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Just to mention two, there was a civil war in Tajikistan, and we have recently seen in 2010 renewed ethnic clashes in Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan, the southern region, being one part of the Fergana Valley, which is a very fertile region, and it actually today belongs a part to Kyrgyzstan, a part to Tajikistan, Afghanistan and another part to Uzbekistan. And it's a very mixed population, so there you can also see the challenges that that region actually faces. Now, the EU, of course, will continue to promote regional cooperation, will try to assist in improving relations between neighbors, because it is a must from our point of view. That also means that we support confidence-building measures and try to assist in reducing tensions that arise from certain disputes. One of the areas where actually there are disputes and where there is also potential for conflict is water. Water, because there are downstream countries, there are upstream countries, and while of course it's legitimate for the upstream countries to want to use the Sir Darya or the Amu Darya and its tributaries for energy production, it is equally legitimate for the downstream countries to actually to want to use that water for irrigation. And of course, for a country like, for instance, Uzbekistan, irrigation is a crucial basis for cotton production and for the whole agricultural sphere. Now, another issue that has complicated the relations in the region is that borders are insufficiently delimited. They stem from Soviet times, but where exactly they are is not always clear, and so again, there are disputes centered around that. Today, the EU and Central Asia are also increasingly focusing on what we call common threats and challenges, such as terrorism, organized crime, various forms of trafficking, human beings, drugs, weapons. And of course, you will not be surprised to hear that these, of course, are transnational threats, and many of them are transiting through Central Asia, actually on their way from Afghanistan to then Russia, the European sphere, or other parts of the world. And of course, they are a destabilizing factor for the Central Asian states themselves. And of course, again, and here's the linkage to economic security, poverty, lack of economic opportunities are a breeding ground for these kind of transnational threats. They, by the way, also are a breeding ground for potential radicalization of the population, which again would and could undermine stability in that region. Now, I'll go to the second part, and I'll now look beyond Central Asia. Now, traditionally and historically, Central Asia has had very close linkages to South Asia. Many of you have heard the Silk Road. The Silk Road, of course, it came from South Asia. It passed through Central Asia to go on to Europe, to Russia, to other regions. And so actually we are here confronted with another legacy of the Soviet past, which is that somehow through the Soviet Union and the inclusion of these Central Asian states in it, a kind of border was erected on that particular line. And to this day, it continues, I would say, to shape our look at the region, but it also shapes very simply our own institutional structures. Like now in the EU, as well as in most of the foreign ministries I know around the world, you will have your Asian region and South Asia. It will not include Central Asia, and Central Asia will be somewhere clustered with Russia and CIS. So we, in some sense, repeat or we cement this kind of particular separation in our thinking. And I think here's one of the challenges, because it simply does not do to look at this region only from one particular perspective, namely then like from an angle which is kind of from either Russia or Turkey. It also needs to include the traditional linkages with the South. Now, Afghanistan has been a key issue for discussion between the EU and Central Asia over the past years. But today it is now becoming an ever more important topic because of the imminent withdrawal in 2014 of NATO troops from Afghanistan. And of course, there is an anxiety in Central Asia because the fear, of course, is that there might be some destabilization in Afghanistan, that there might be an increase in some of the transnational threats. And of course, for the Central Asians, the question is how actually should we deal with that? Now, keeping the broader region stable and prosperous requires to foster dialogue and cooperation, not only to address the existing or possibly newly emerging transnational threats, but also in order to enhance the crucial economic and social cooperation. Because, as I said before, without poverty reduction, economic development, cross-border trade, security and stability will not be kept and will not be guaranteed. So Afghanistan, and that is the key message that the EU also always highlights, should be seen, especially also in this situation, as an opportunity for broadening the economic cooperation and the development in the wider region. The EU, therefore, is committed to a broad regional approach, and we want to work hand in hand with the international community in the spirit of processes and initiatives such as the Istanbul process, the Heart of Asia efforts, or RECA 5. And of course, in this endeavor to foster the broader regional cooperation, ownership by the countries in the region is essential. So the EU can be a participant, can be a contributor, but the ownership must lie with the countries in the region. And it must also lie with direct neighbors such as Russia, China, Turkey, India, Afghanistan, and so forth. Now, to reflect the realities of this linkage which we increasingly see between Central Asia and Afghanistan, the EU and its Central Asian partners have already started to develop synergies between various assistance programs. For instance, the EU has a border management program in northern Afghanistan as well as in Central Asia, and of course basically it's the same border you are looking at, so it should be synergistic, it should actually support each other. But the same is true for fostering trade. So there are a couple of cross-border projects, such as building bridges across the Pyandj, which is the border river between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, to allow the good neighborly relations and trade to go forward. Now, to give you a little bit an insight into what the EU policy will focus on in the upcoming years. Now, this November in Bishkek, we will have the next EU Central Asia ministerial meeting. It will be chaired, and that is a first, so for the first time the High Representative Cathy Ashton will personally travel to Bishkek to chair that ministerial meeting. And it will be an occasion to launch a new high-level political dialogue about security between the EU and Central Asia. And that, of course, again, as you can easily imagine, will include then especially Afghanistan and the question how we deal with the broader challenges in the region. Now, through the Central Asia strategy, a strong foundation for this EU engagement in the region has already been created. I'll give you some examples. I've already spoken about the border management programs, but there are also programs on fighting drug abuse in the region, which is, of course, another very important issue. And also the engagement in the area of counter-terrorism activities has become more significant over the last years. And I want to highlight here especially that the Central Asia was the first region actually to adopt a regional joint plan of action to implement the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. So we have something actually to build on, where the question, of course, would be, so will it be then only Central Asia, or how do we make, again, the linkages with the other neighbors, such as Afghanistan? The EU also recently agreed to help to counter the threat of spreading chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear materials in the region, with the possible establishment of a Central Asia Regional Center for Excellence in this field. As said before, addressing the threats alone will not ensure security. Therefore, we also focus on economic development, poverty reduction, and on the numerous social challenges in the region. The EU, therefore, will also reinforce key initiatives that have already run now for 5 years in the areas of education, rule of law, environment and water. And of course, we always do that in a regional format, because the ultimate idea is that in all of these areas, of course, the region and the countries in the region should be very close in developing their education system, their legal system, their trade system, and they should also look towards integrated border management to facilitate trade in the future. Another area of activity is the promotion of economic diversification, regional development policies, but also support for small and medium enterprises, which after all are the backbone of the economy in many countries around the world. Now, another area of cooperation, and here again, I don't think that anyone can ensure security without looking beyond the region itself, and that is energy cooperation. So again, if you look at the upstream potentials in Central Asia and you ask yourself, where are the energy markets for that with a longer term perspective? Yes, there's neighboring China, there's India a little bit further down, there's Afghanistan with a big need for energy. So there is a huge potential that needs to be developed during the next years. And then on water, where I've mentioned that that is not an easy issue in Central Asia, let me say that, of course, Afghanistan, geographically, hydrological, is a part of the Aral Sea basin. So it actually belongs to that bigger region if we want to work on the Aral Sea or on the waters around it. Of course, the cooperation also extends to human rights. There are human rights dialogues that the EU has with all countries in the region, but it also extends to judicial independence, good governance, and civil society development. Now, again, it applies to Central Asia and its countries, but it also applies to the countries next door. So again, the question of the experience, can one share this experience, how can we link these together, is a very important one. And now to just add one final point here, of course, as many of you know, in Afghanistan, part of the population is actually ethnically Tajik or Uzbek or Turkmen. So there are a lot of opportunities actually to also develop this human element. Lastly, let me say the EU will remain committed to Central Asia and to Afghanistan. And Central Asia, that has always been at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, should redevelop its ties with the South, with India, with Afghanistan, with Iran, so that, again, in the future, we can recreate the traditional ties that were strong in the past, but then cut off in Soviet times. Our challenge is now, and for you also for your conference, to find the ways how we can actually support these kind of linkages, the regional cooperation on trade, on culture, on energy, on security, while of course for Central Asia, maintaining at the same time the equally historic relations with Europe. Let us try to work together for this goal. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We've had 4 different points of view. May I ask any of our three remaining speakers here, if they have any comments that are stimulated by what they've already heard that they'd like to share with us. The general view, unanimous, is that we should take views from the floor first and perhaps then summarize the reactions to those views. So, some comments from the floor. So.
Thank you very much, and thank the speakers for the very thought-provoking and interesting statements. My name is Mashadi. I am a former diplomat and also international civil servant, but I'm okay now. There are a couple of points which I would like to refer to as my comment, particularly with regard to what Ambassador Somaya and also Hesham said. One is whether these diversities in these, whether we call it 2 regions, 3 regions, Middle East, Southwest Asia, and Central Asia, whether these diversities and commonalities can be used as uniting factors or the tension, factors for tension. Of course, the complementarities that we can see is that one sub-region can provide energy to another area, and this is somehow the complementarity parts regarding the gas pipelines, regarding the sharing of energy resources. The one area is usually consumer of food, particularly in the area of the Persian Gulf and all those parts, and other areas like India, Pakistan, and others are growing wheat supplies. And also one or third uniting factor is religion in the region, except the part of Israel or India that also they have Muslim communities there. The whole region also enjoys one religion to an extent. And also, as Hesham mentioned clearly, the water scarcity can be also a uniting factor, unifying factor among all these. At the same time, we have to be cognizant of the diversities among these regions or among the participants in the region. One is that in most of these countries, the political agenda based on zero-sum game dictates and determines the economic growth, or at some points impedes the economic growth in the regions. While in the crisis time, the economic trade should help the political diversities to be mended, the political decision sometimes impedes the economic growth. The second problem is the lack of private sector in most of these countries. As also it was mentioned, the state are the owners or the stake owners of most of the economic activities, particularly in the Middle East area. And the third factor, which is also to a large extent common, is the corruption, which is rampant, and you can see that throughout the region, no matter which region you're talking about. And I think the fourth element could be also lack of social grassroots democratic institutions, which to a large extent also have clouded the Arab Spring. Also, I agree with Ambassador Hesham that these diversities could be unifying factor if they are addressed properly. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll come back at the end. Thanks.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Let me again also join the previous speaker to congratulate you on very thought-provoking discussions here this morning. My question is very simple. Listening to the special representative of EU, in her remarks, her reference to Central Asia and Afghanistan, that is something, a confusing concept. Is that mean that there is a new categorization of Central Asia and Afghanistan, or Afghanistan remains as a linking a country with various regions? That's where its interest lies. Afghanistan, as the foreign minister has just in his remark emphasize that one of the importance of Afghanistan is its geopolitical position, which reaching all the region, which is a part of the region and the other regions, adjacent regions. So that needs a clarification. I would like her comments on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Actually, my presentation did not mean that we don't have room for cooperation. We have. But we have as much as we have with other regions. I don't see specific reasons why we have to have a framed region. For instance, Egypt, the biggest economic partner is the EU. Our exports go mostly to EU. So if we're gonna change this framework and talk about a different focus shifting to the East, that would not deal with the actuality. But I'm saying we have to build on what is actual. Moreover, this region, the extended one, has a lot of political tensions. And as President Ihtisari said, I don't think we can visualize economic security and cooperation unless we settle down these conflicts. And they are all over. And some of them are perennial, as it is in the Arab world. So I think that room for cooperation, yes. We can build on synergies, yes. But also we have to see how far we can go against what is actual now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to present myself. My name is Adel Atiye, and I used to work for the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but for the time being, I'm working at the University of Brussels, trying to finish my PhD in security studies in the Middle East. And I have a couple of comments, and I would like to put a question to His Excellency Ambassador Youssef. Sorry?
Please speak up a little. Thanks.
I thought that the micro is in. Okay, now. So I have a couple of comments since I'm working on security issues in the Middle East, and one can see that the Middle East is still a very militarized region, and we are the biggest weapon market in the world. 45% of the weapons transfers to the developing countries go to the Middle East. And contrary to the general belief that during the last 10 years, that military spending in the Middle East increased by more than 35%. So this is a major issue of concern for, and decision makers should take it in consideration for any future economic development plans in the Middle East. My remark is linked to the cooperation between the Arab world and the EU, which is a cornerstone in any successful development projects, economic growth in the Middle East. And what I witnessed, I served in Brussels for 10 years, that I witnessed the failure of the Barcelona process. I cannot name it in other words. And I also witnessed the very complicated functioning of the Union for the Mediterranean and the main obstacles to reinforce economic relations between the Arab world and Europe. And one more time, I'm saying that any successful economic policies in the Middle East depends on our economic partnership with Europe. But what I see that in Europe until today, unfortunately, that relations with the Arab world are conditioned with the political position that the EU adopt toward Israel and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And it's very often, Ambassador Youssef mentioned that they proposed a neighborhood policy for the Arab world. We have been working on that in Brussels. Just to avoid obstacles to reinforce our cooperation with Europe is to bypass some political obstacles. And the position of the EU was always, we do not deal with the Arab world as a region. We will deal with the Middle East, including Israel. And this is a main obstacle. So Ambassador Hesham, Youssef, Is it possible for the Arab world to imagine today an alternative solution, since it's not possible to establish a true, real partnership with Europe? Is it possible? Are you thinking in the Arab world for other alternatives, such as, for example, to reinforce the economic relations with Asia, with China, with Japan, and to create a dynamic economy which can bring investment to the Arab world, and which can encourage the inter-Arab exchange also in trade? Because this is another sad fact, that the intra-exchange in the Arab world, I think that it's just only 6% of the Arab trade is between the Arab countries. So what are the alternatives? What are the solutions that you can imagine for that? And please just underline the relationships with Europe and alternatives for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also have a comment on what was mentioned by Mr. Mashhadi. First, regarding the definition of a region. Of course, defining a region is a very complicated issue. And the Middle East has not been defined, despite the fact that we've been talking about the Middle East for many decades, even centuries. But we do not have a clear definition of what constitutes the Middle East. As for relations between countries, sometimes you may find that the relations between an Arab country and a non-Arab country can be much stronger than relations between two Arab countries. So it is normal to have, at one point in time, very strong relations between Syria and Turkey. And now they have problems. Or between the Gulf countries and Iran, that we hope can be put on the right track. Because these countries, the proximity of Iran as compared to Morocco for the Gulf countries is significant. So some elements are dictated by politics, others are dictated by geographical proximity. And on the other side, it's exactly the same in the case of the relations between Morocco and Spain, for example. So this has to be taken into consideration. The second point is in relation to what you mentioned about the fact that most of the countries in the Arab world are Muslim communities. Yes, of course, they are. But this also has another dimension in relation to the Sunni Shiite factor that has resulted in all kinds of tensions. This started in Iraq after the war. This also is extended in Syria today, and we see the tensions in Lebanon, and so on. So the Muslim issue is becoming more and more complicated, particularly also after political Islam has become more and more dominant of a factor on the scene. King Abdullah of Jordan, a few years back, when he spoke about the Shiite Crescent, it created a row at the international level. Now there are those who are thinking about a Shiite Crescent facing a Sunni Crescent led by the Muslim Brotherhood, starting from Morocco, going to Turkey. And that Syria is at the crossroad of these two crescents. So it is becoming quite interesting. But you mentioned that there is a lack of private sector. I don't think that this is the case anymore in the Arab world. The private sector is extremely active. Corruption is rampant? Absolutely. And I hope that the changes in the Arab world addresses this issue. You also mentioned that there is weakness in the grassroots organization. This is true, but it is changing at an alarming speed. You wouldn't believe the grassroots organizations in Egypt now and the impact that they have already on the ground in relation to what happened regarding military courts, for example, in relation to issues pertaining to women in the Constitution. As a result of their effort, one article in the draft Constitution have already been deleted that they saw was detrimental to the rights of women. As to the question by my Palestinian friend, tomorrow there is a meeting taking place in the Arab League between the 27 foreign ministers of Europe and the 22 Arab foreign ministers. So we're trying to push in this direction for us to be recognized as a region and for cooperation to take place between the Arab world and Europe, regardless of what happens in the case of Israel. You know, it's not that we are against, you were a witness to the Barcelona process and the Union for the Mediterranean. So the question in as far as Israel is concerned cannot be separated from how things evolve on the Palestinian question. They can do whatever they wish. It will not be separated. So developments pertaining to integrating Israel in this process is dependent on how things evolve on the Palestinian question. And as long as there is no progress in the Palestinian question, then we will always have problems, whether you call it Barcelona process, Union of the Mediterranean, neighborhood policy, call it whatever you wish. It will face problems as long as there is no progress in the Middle East. And the question is not to substitute Europe by China and Japan. No. We will continue to be neighbors with Europe. Europe is strategically important for our region, and we are important for Europe from a strategic point of view. The population of Europe is shrinking. They will not get people from China. They will probably receive more and more people coming from our part of the world. And it would be better for both sides if this is done in an orderly way, for the advantage of both Europe and our part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you for that thoughtful contribution. Ambassador, you had an answer.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I wanted to answer the question raised. No, there's no new notion here or a new kind of regional setup. It's just that when you look at it from a Central Asia angle, and then even if you then think about Afghanistan as a place where actually many of these lines intersect. That is absolutely true, and that means that also for the Central Asians, of course, to trade with India or to engage with others further south, this will go through Afghanistan. But of course, the first step is to relink some of the infrastructure, for instance, which has been cut off during some time on this particular border. So therefore, it's important now to actually look at the synergies and at the potential for cooperation that you have between the Central Asia region and Afghanistan as a neighbor of actually 3 of the 5 Central Asian states. And just to say that I will have to leave on time at 11:15. I apologize.
Yeah, my name is Fawzia Manzoor. I'm from Pakistan Embassy, and I just want to end the session on an optimistic note. And my question to all the panelists is the same. Like when we talk in terms of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, don't you think that we should be bit more optimistic about the region? Because if we look at the trade figures between Pakistan and Afghanistan, it is reaching around $2.5 billion, all set to reach $5 billion by 2015. Our exports to Afghanistan are now $2.3 billion, which were in 2001 only 26 million. Similarly, with India, we have given the MFN status, and visa restrictions have relaxed to a considerable extent. And a lot of trade delegations are in Pakistan from India, and from India they are coming to Pakistan, and vice versa. So yes, we should be have this anxiety that what will happen, but shouldn't we in the panels and while internationally we are speaking, shouldn't we be a bit more optimistic about the region? Because if we just look at the scale of the projects which we which we have the plans, and some are already, in the implementation phase, I think we do have hope, and we should be a bit more optimistic.
Well, let's fold that question relating to optimism into any others that you would like to answer that have come up.
Now, of course, we didn't mean to sound as if we are pessimistic. Definitely no. Definitely no. But at least my presentation was talking about the global aspect of the issue. That's it. But it doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge the positive steps that are being taken in the region. Definitely. But what we are saying that the political aspect first has to be dealt with. in order to have economic security. And we have to be careful when we talk about a periphery of a regional organization. That's what, at least what I was talking about. I'm going to Pakistan in a week's time under the framework of the G8, for instance. There are, possible cooperation, but we have to see why we are cooperating in this region and what we are actually doing, and we have to prioritize issues. We have to time issues. We have to put time and to see them in phases. But we have to be very careful because the region is a hot region. Thank you very much.
Personally, I'm extremely optimistic in relation to regional cooperation. But regional cooperation requires leadership. And this is the problem. Because in many regions in the world, there is a lack of leadership that can project a long-term strategic view, similar to the experience that we saw in the most successful regional integration experiment, which is Europe. So that is the point. The question is, because at the end of the day, integration carries cost, and cost has to be paid by somebody. And this somebody has to be a leader that is willing to take the political risk and achieve this objective. So this is the issue that I think is crucial in relation to success of regional integration and regional cooperation.
Well, thank you very much. I think we owe a vote of thanks to our speakers who, apart from their tendency, understandably, to disappear, also managed to expand their answers beautifully, and we filled the time with 4 speakers rather than 6. So I ask you to join me in thanking the speakers. And